Hello, everyone. Uh, the first thing I'd like to do is thank Dr. Birch for inviting me to participate in this symposium on religion, culture, and diversity. Uh, my name again is Dr. Roy Whitaker. I'm an associate professor of religion at San Diego State University. My research focuses on Africana philosophies of religion and American religious diversity, and I teach a course on religion and politics. The title of this symposium immediately grabbed my attention: the challenge of Christian nationalism, religion, politics, and pluralistic democracy. Um, I found the title with the word challenge in it could have a double meaning. On the one hand, Christian nationalism challenges at this key moment the zeitgeist, religion, politics, and pluralistic democracy. On the other hand, Christian nationalism is also inherently challenging fraud as a concept and complex enterprise, logic, and pathos. An ideology movement that is or it has the possibility to be antithetical to progressive religion, politics, and healthy democracy. I appreciate the opportunity, and it's a privilege to converse with Dr. Butler. And Dr. Butler is a leading scholar on these topics, chair of religious studies at the University of Pennsylvania. Dr. Butler is an historian of African-American religion. Dr. Butler has recently written the book, White Evangelical Racism, The Politics of Morality in America. And it's my pleasure to moderate this conversation. And I have my own questions, and I'll try to incorporate some of yours as well. A great deal will be, Dr. Butler has a presentation to make, and I will probably ask a couple questions along the way. With that, I want to thank Dr. Butler for being here.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I want to start off by showing one clip, and then we're going to talk a little bit about that, and then I'll kind of work my way through as the questions come. I had a presentation, but I think maybe a conversation about what I'm showing might be more useful for all of you. So let me just show this clip first, and then I'll explain who this is and why he's talking. So give me a second, and we'll get this in your screen. And here we go. And I'm going to minimize myself so that you don't have to see me.
It's all part of the king coming back. That's what we're practicing for. That's why hell hates it that we're worshiping at every capital across America. That's why we get called, well, you're a Christian nationalist. You want the kingdom to be the government. Yes. You want God to come and overtake the government? Yes. You want Christians to be the only ones? Yes, we do. We wouldn't be a disciple of Jesus if we didn't believe that. We want God to be in control of everything. We want believers to be the ones writing the laws. Yes, guilty as charged. I mean, it's funny when I meet Christians where I'm like, I'm like, have you read the Great Commission? Like, this is actually what we want. Guilty.
All right, so hopefully that probably scared you just enough. That is Christian nationalist Sean Feucht. Sean Feucht was a worship leader before the pandemic, but when the pandemic happened, he started traveling around the country, doing these open air worship meetings and having church meetings. Now, if you remember anything about the COVID-19 pandemic, this was a time when people were afraid to have people congregate in big groups. Singing was a way that the virus was transmitted. And basically, he defied laws in many states across this country by getting people together. But now he has become somewhat of a Christian nationalist apologist and is a very big leader on the scene. And so I start off with that because he really explicitly says what Christian nationalists want. They want the kingdom of God here on earth right now in America, and they want Christians running the government. And so when we talk about Christian nationalism, we can't just talk about this as to say that Christians really love America or whatever country that they're in. What they want is a Christian theocracy. They want a theocracy. And the way they want that theocracy is for Christians to be in power. They want to have rules that are based in the Bible. They want to have everything done by Christians and for Christians, with everybody else's freedoms and rights as citizens curtailed based on biblical law. Now, we talked about what was Christian nationalism. You wanted to ask me this question. So what I want to do is just show you one more slide that'll take care of that real quick and let you see what white Christian nationalism is. And I will talk through this because this is my definition. I will fully own it. And this is something that we've all agreed on. What is white Christian nationalism? Simply put, it is the belief that America's founding is based on Christian principles. White Protestant Christianity is the operational religion of the land. Notice I said Protestantism, okay? And that Christianity should be the foundation of how the nation develops its laws, principles, and policies. And so people who embrace white Christian nationalism believe several things. They believe that America is a divinely appointed nation by God that is Christian. That's number one. Number two, America's founders, rather than wanting to disestablish religion as a unifier for the nation, were in fact establishing a nation based on Christian principles with white men as leaders. Others, Native Americans, enslaved Africans, and immigrants, would accept and cede to this narrative of America as a Christian nation and accept their leadership. America has a special place not only in world history, but in biblical scripture, especially concerning the return of Christ. There is no separation, notice this, there is no separation between church and state. And then finally, a longing for nostalgia for a time that never really was. What I mean by that is sort of the idealist when people say things are terrible now, we wish we could just go back to the good old days. The good old days were 1950s when it was Jim Crow and segregation and all of this, as though that was the perfect time in America, and it really wasn't. So I want to start there, and perhaps Dr. Whitaker, we could go forward and have a little discussion about this.
Thank you so much, Dr. Butler. That was my initial question, definitional. What is white Christian nationalism? And thank you for those dynamic slides and beginning sketch of a leader in this movement. And so that's exactly what I thought about. It ran through my mind. A theocracy is in their mind. It sounds to me that this founding of the nation based upon Protestant principles, it seems that, at least from their perspective, there seems to be a lack of nuance because the Protestant tradition is quite expansive. You know, there's mainline Protestant groups, there's more progressive Protestant groups, the Black Church, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
But they feel very comfortable in this type of nostalgia and this marrying of religion and politics. And it seems to greatly exclude anyone who is frankly not white and not Christian. And they seem to find biblical support for these ideas in their thinking and worldview.
Yeah, that's right. They do find biblical support in that. I mean, in part because they believe that the founders and the framers were framing this in a biblical way. One of the big people who has positioned all of this, David Barton, who is, and I put this in quotation marks, historian, who's been writing about this for a long time, has tried to pose the founders and the framers as being specifically or making a Christian nation. Now, we know, if you know any history, that that's not true. They're coming over here in part to get away from religious persecution, first of all, and then secondarily to say that, you know, we will have freedom of religion. Anybody can come and do what they want. Thomas Jefferson had a Quran referred to it. Thomas Jefferson also cut up the Bible and made the Jefferson Bible, where he didn't even want to have anything that wasn't other than the ethical words of Jesus inside of it, okay? So I think that one of the misnomers for white Christian nationalists especially is that they see things through this lens that's really fractured. And what I call it a fractured lens is because they see it through whiteness. They see it through the lens of white male privilege and Protestantism and exclude everyone else. It's not to say that Catholics don't want to be, you know, Christian nationalists either. It is just to say that they see it through a male hierarchical vision of what the country should be.
I appreciate that response because it really dealt with another follow-up question I had, which was, you know, what is white about white Christian nationalism? What is quote unquote Christian about white Christian nationalism? And what is nationalistic about white Christian nationalism? Along the same line, if I may ask, and that is how, because you provided a great historical framework and early founders, immigrants from Europe, for instance, were looking for religious freedom and expression. My question is, how do we divide white Christian nationalism from sort of the larger American post-colonial democratic experiment? I mean, in the sense that there seems to be within American history, the manifest destiny. There's been a history of not seeing Black people as fully human. So is the white Christian nationalism part of this larger American experiment, or?
Duh. Yes. Moving on now. Yes. I mean, obviously, because manifest destiny means you're going to go take whatever is out there that belongs to you, right? And so you take Native American land, you move people off of that. Manifest destiny means that you can have people who are enslaved. I mean, this whole history, and this is one of the reasons why I wrote my book, right, Evangelical Racism, is that evangelicals themselves were not able to see this narrative. They only thought of themselves as valorous. Oh, we were against slavery. Oh, we did this. Oh, we did that. But I'm like, no, you owned slaves. Your old churches broke apart because of slavery. You fomented the lost cause. You lynched people. You did this. You did that. There's a whole history here that tracks with the history of America. And I think this is one of the reasons why right now we're having so many conversations about history and who should teach history and what. Let's take, for instance, a very, I would say white Christian nationalist kind of government, Florida's governor, right? Ron DeSantis. What do? We don't have people to even be able to learn about African American religious history in February because you have to sign off because we don't want woke things in the classroom. Okay. That's one way to push down the history of people in this country for a bigger nationalistic idea about what it means to be American. And so, to get to your question, a deeper way is to also talk about how people have talked about America throughout history. So one way to do that is I think about this in the 20th century narrative of thinking about how people thought about Americanism in the 40s and 50s when they were pushing against communism. And then you talk about, great Americans. You try to valorize America during the civil rights and the Vietnam War era. You get to the 70s and people start talking about words like American exceptionalism. And that word came out in the 21st century too, with elections. And then we get to Make America Great Again. Okay. And Make America Great Again was a great declension narrative to say all these kinds of ideologies have made us weak. And now here is the candidate who can make America great again by bringing out the whiteness in America.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And along the same lines as you provide a historical narrative, you mentioned the word of nostalgia and this kind of, let's say, quote unquote, selective memory of Americans. So in this valorism of this kind of innocent self and this sort of almost forgetfulness of the original sin of slavery in American history, what is it about, you think, American white Christian nationalism that helps to feed this narrative? Or better yet, what is it about America that likes to forget about our history? Is it that we don't like to look at this dark side, or what is the mirror that we're looking at ourselves in?
As I say, a fractured one. I mean, because in part it's fractured because of race and racism and the ways in which people want to imagine how things are. It's for instance, I will give you a great example of how you see history. Let's talk about Martin Luther King Jr. Someone who was, very much involved in the civil rights movement, the major figure of the civil rights movement against the Vietnam War, against poverty. How do people talk about him now? Oh, he was a great leader, and he talked about the color of our skin and the content of our character. That is the only thing that they remember. They don't remember that in 1963, in that great speech of his, where he says America has written a blank check, a check marked insufficient funds. Right. So he's calling out America in that speech at the very beginning at the March on Washington because America has not kept up to its promises. But people have this selective memory about him. And so when you see all these people who are very much Christian nationalists saying, oh, he was so great and he just wanted all the races to get along, it's this homogenization of an ideal, first of all. And then secondarily, a way to make him less powerful. Less critiquing of the culture, less critiquing of America. And so I find that this nostalgia is about reinstantiating power structures and situations that, do not enfranchise many people, like women, like, people of color, like immigrants and others. I mean, there are some people on the right now who are even saying maybe women shouldn't have the right to vote. in addition to taking away abortion rights and everything else. So I think this is a piece about not just power, but a certain type of male-inflected religious power that plays into nationalism very well.
Thank you so much for breaking the point in the way in which American textbooks, American history, American political leaders have sanitized a king's message. And I mean, if you just think about the civil rights movement, I mean, it's a countercultural movement. And, the easiest thing to be today is a Kingian, or to be, quote unquote, on the side of MLK. But his message was radical, as you mentioned before. We have the Radical King, Cornel West's book, another text as well, speaking to this history and this power dynamic. And then it seems then that along this line, you mentioned it before a bit too, in terms of the theocracy of the mindset and theology of white Christian nationalists. It sounds and seems really clear that there is a co-option of Christianity that they don't realize, or how do we compare more of the progressive aspects of, let's say, the Black church that are using Christianity as a liberatory method, a way of release, way of bondage, sort of basically if there's a comparison we could make between, let's say, white Christian nationalism and Black Christian nationalism, groups such as that, or
So I'm a religious scholar, so this is where I'm going to take this and make this sharper for you, okay? This is not a co-optation of Christianity. This is how they live their Christianity. This is their Christian belief, okay? And so what I always want to say to people as a 2,000-year trained Christian historian, Christianity has been used a lot to subjugate people. We can't just think about it as this nice religion all the time. And I think this is the hard thing that people struggle with, first of all. That's what I want to say up front. The second thing is that there are many different kind of Christianities, right? It's not just Christianity as singular, it's plural. And what I mean by that plural is how people come to the text, how they read their theology, how they see themselves acting in the world. So if we think about Black churches come into being in part because those are the only places that people can meet. That I write this whole history in my chapter on church in the 1619 book to talk about when you have enslaved Africans come over, if you have to learn about Christianity, because that's not the religion of most people who are enslaved who come to this country, then you figure out that these messages of liberation, the Israelites being freed from Egypt, Moses leading them out, all these things, you appropriate those stories to yourself. That's a certain kind of hermeneutic. White Christian nationalists have a hermeneutic too. Their hermeneutic rests upon the fact that they believe that men should have authority, God is on their side, that the Bible has been inscripted, that the Bible has America in it. And I'd love to play this clip from General Flynn in a little bit that will just tell you exactly how this works out. So it's about how you interpret scripture. It's about your interpretation of theology, how you write theologies. This is going just off track for a minute, but for those of you who know something about churches, we can think about Calvinism as a way that created apartheid. And so this is how people need to understand that you can have a religious belief, you can have Christianity, but it could split off in 1,000 different ways, and different people are going to see it differently.
Thank you so much for making that point. I teach a course on Christianity at my university, and one of my first points is that there are Christianities in explaining the history. I think you mentioned you may want to share a clip.
Yeah, I do want to share this clip. And let me just set this up. This clip that I'm going to share is about General Michael Flynn, and I think it really gets to where how Christian nationalism works itself out, and how people who are adherents to this do this. It's going to be a little bit long, but I think it's worthwhile for us to listen to. So let me just share my screen with you real quick, and let me play this.
A lot about from different people today, I think, when we talk about faith, there's something shaking. Okay, the ground underneath us is shaking. And it's shaking because, there is a time, and you have to believe this, that God Almighty is involved in this country, because this is it. This is it. This is the last place on earth. This is the shining city on the hill. This is the city on the hill. The city on the hill. The city on the hill was mentioned in Matthew. Okay, it was mentioned in Matthew. And then a guy by the name of Winthrop mentioned it again in 1630. In 1630. Okay, before the country was formed, And he also coined the term New England. We're going to go to this New England, this new world he was talking about. And he talked to the people there about this thing called the city on the hill. And then Ronald Reagan, a couple hundred years later, again, talked about it as the shining city on the hill. And they're talking about the United States of America. Talking about the United States of America, because when Matthew mentioned it in the Bible, he wasn't talking about the physical ground that he was on. He was talking about something in the distance. So if we are going to have one nation under God, which we must, we have to have one religion, one nation under God and one religion under God, right? All of us together, working together. I don't care what your ecumenical service is or what you are. We have to believe that this is a moment in time where this is good versus evil. So, ladies and gentlemen, a lot about from different people today, I think, when we talk.
So I think that gets really to what this Christian nationalism is all about. He sees this, he puts this history in. He says that America is in the Bible. I'm sorry, I went to seminary. I never saw that, but okay. But he makes this whole trajectory so that you see how this is connected. And I think that's a really explicit way of showing how Christian nationalism works alongside of how people interpret scripture.
Great, thank you so much. And yeah, I was seeing in the clip you provided this weaving in biblical and then contemporary historical figures, and I appreciate that. In terms of the locale of white Christian nationalism and the centering of America and whiteness and religion, just out of curiosity, in a global reach, do you see white nationalism in other countries? Is it being exported in other places, or is it just simply a uniquely American?
It is not uniquely American. That's number one. Let me just go down the list, and then I'm going to give you the last one with the story. Christian nationalism is everywhere right now. I mean, if we look at what's happening with Russia and Ukraine, Putin has a very deep idea about what is happening with the Orthodox Church vis-a-vis Ukraine, and how he sees whiteness as a part of that, and how he wants to get rid of LGBTQ people, all this kind of stuff. We could see this in a different way with Hindu nationalism in India, and Narendra Modi, who is against pretty much all the Muslims and has instantiated Hinduism as a way to think about a different kind of religious nationalism. We can see this with Viktor Orban, and these people are all kind of together as a piece, okay? Viktor Orban, we see that with him as well. He was just with Donald Trump down at Mar-a-Lago like about a month and a half ago. We could see this in Brazil in the context of Bolsonaro and his failed election bid, and how people who were evangelicals there in Brazil also took over and tried to overrun the Capitol. The starkest time I've seen this, however, this gets to a phrase that I say in the book about the promise of whiteness, was when I was in Lagos, Nigeria in 2018 doing some research, and I spoke with a pastor there, and I didn't even get to this question, but he basically said this to me. We were having a conversation, and he's like, I'm so glad Hillary Clinton did win, because Donald Trump is a great man, and he, he's going to do all these things, and she would have had too many abortions. And I looked at him and I said, but you know that Donald Trump called Nigeria S-hole country, right? And he's like, well, yeah, we are an S-hole country, but Donald Trump is a great man, and we need to be like him. So this promise of whiteness, this promise of inclusion, is one of the reasons why you don't just have white Christian nationalism. You have people who are non-white who want to be like white Christian nationalists. And so while that might seem like a conundrum, I think we have to deal with the fact that, the entry point for many people, including a lot of immigrants to this country, is to emulate these kinds of people in order to be more involved in what they see as the culture of the nation.
Thank you very much for that response, and putting it within a global context, and beginning to articulate also those who may not be white Christian nationalists and how they can identify with the movement. And it gets to this, what you mentioned earlier too, is about sort of even interesting, this conversation of whiteness and purity and nostalgia in sort of the quote unquote the whitewashing of history. It's sort of this dynamic between their white Christian nationalists can ignore historic phenomena, whether it be slavery, racism, whether it be manifest destiny through taking of indigenous land, that gets sort of pushed under the rug for this purity. And so is it they're able to sort of ignore, let's say, the character flaws of Donald Trump can you sort of explain this kind of, let's call it, I don't want to use maybe the Messiah complex, how, or more largely, how does Donald Trump fit within the white Christian nationalist paradigm? Is he purely a symbol, a representative?
No, he is the father and foundation. Let me be very clear, first of all. He's not a symbol. He has proven himself to be the leader of a white Christian nationalist movement. And I think that we cannot see, I don't like to sugarcoat anything, okay? So I'm not going to sugarcoat this. When Donald Trump said he was running for president, he came down the escalator, he started talking about Mexicans were rapists and everything else. He set the tone, okay? These elements have always been in American culture. It's not that they haven't been there. What Donald Trump did was exploit the exploit that was already there. It was just laying in wait, waiting, okay? And so now you can see the results of this, where he came out in 2015. I always remind people, you need to remember that the day that Donald Trump came out off the escalator, down the escalator to talk about all this, the next day, what happened? You had the murders of 10 African Americans, non-African Americans at Emmanuel AME Church by Dylan Roof, who was a white supremacist. So put that in mind. That's literally a day after he came down the escalator, okay? He's also the person who said there are bad people on both sides when Charlottesville happened. When a young white woman was killed being run over by a car by somebody who was a white nationalist, basically. So there are so many ways to parse this out. There is no sugarcoating who he is and what he has been. The reason why they think he is a savior is because he's given them what they wanted. He has given over 300 judges. He gave them 3 Supreme Court judges. He is promising, and I have clips of this too. If we had longer time, I'd play all this stuff. He is promising them power if he is reelected again in 2024. And so all of this stuff and all the rollbacks to DEI, the conversations about CRT, critical race theory, which nobody has learned in any elementary school ever. And I challenge anybody here today to tell me what it is. It's all of this is a piece. And so these rollbacks and the pushbacks against books in schools and all of this are racially motivated. And I don't think we can get away from this. I do not think we can sugarcoat it. I also don't think that we should take it lightly.
Thank you very much for that response, because it gets to sort of a question I thought about as well, which was the implications of white Christian nationalism. And you've already highlighted a number of those for us, whether it be critical race theory, the DEI pushback, and understanding that, Donald Trump is the embodiment of what this undercurrent that's been part of the American culture in history for quite some while in politics, and he's giving people the power that they so had desired. Along the same line, did you want to play anything quickly? I don't know if you want to add anything from this.
I think, the thing I would just add to this, there might be one more thing I will play very quickly. I think you should probably maybe hear from him, and this is going to take me a minute to just queue up. But let me just say this. I think, one of the things that you need to really think about, towards the end, let me just show this really quick, because I think this also gets to it. It's not something I need to play. It's just something I need to show you. Basically, I think what you need to understand is that Donald Trump is an instrumentalist. And what I mean by that is that he instrumentally uses, Christianity in the ways that he should. It's not that he can quote any scripture. It's that he knows how to use these props. So the first picture up here where you see him holding up the Bible, upside down, by the way, is when he's out there with General Milley and all of them when they were having Black Lives Matter protests. And he basically wanted them to shoot everybody down. And he held up the Bible in front of St. John's Church, which was very upsetting to the rector there. And that was a thing. But now you've noticed that he's selling Bibles, right? So this was last week during Holy Week, the biggest week of the Christian calendar. He announced that he was selling a Bible with Lee Greenwood. Now, I'm going to tell you a little story very quickly about this Bible. This Bible is in the King James Version. Why? Because there was an earlier version of this Bible that was supposed to be sold that was going to be in a more readable, user-friendly version of the New International Version. But the publisher that was supposed to put it out had been pushed back on by some of the authors that had books there, because they said this is like a Christian nationalist thing, you shouldn't do it. So they re-upped this Bible and did this. So alongside the golden tennis shoes and everything else, this is the second year in a row that Donald Trump has put himself in this kind of messianic position. And this is a book that you can't get anymore. President Donald Trump, the Son of Man, the Christ. And this is how people are thinking about him now. They are thinking about him as though he is this kind of, religious sort of figure who is close enough to Christ. And so I'm mindful of time, and I want to give people enough time to be able to ask questions. So I won't play that last clip, but I will say this. If you want to hear Donald Trump really talk about what he wants in terms of for Christians, you can go and listen to his address to the national religious broadcasters in Tennessee that was less than a month ago. And he really lines this out about how he wants Christians, he wants to give them power, he wants to give evangelicals the power to do certain kinds of things and have power in government. Part of the questions that people are really raising right now is the Heritage Foundation's 2025 project, where they are talking about a complete revamp of the government. This may sound like, oh my God, you're fear-mongering, but it's all here. And so when people say that those of us who are talking about this are fear-mongering, what I like to say to them is, you never thought Roe versus Wade was going to fall, did you? But this has been, 50, 60-year project, and that project is still ongoing. It's not just Roe versus Wade. It's about making the government a Christian government, or theocracy, as I like to call it in a bigger term. And that does not bode well for, freedom and justice for all in this country.
Thank you so much for that response and putting it within that context. And yeah, I mean, you sort of see the kind of within conservative evangelicals, I'll call it a type of patience, right? I mean, in terms of the Roe v. Wade, like chiseling, bit by bit to this momentous point of turning over Roe. And so my question and follow-up would be, in terms of a response, a curtailing of the flow of white Christian nationalism. So the question is it curable? Is there a remedy? How, and this is actually a question that was asked in the chat. Another way to put it is, what can Christians do in their communities to combat Christian nationalism? So is there a response or a hope or a response to Christian nationalism in your view?
I think one of the things you need to do is get involved in your community. For a lot of people, I've been saying this one statement, and this scares everybody, and this is, voting is not enough. Okay, because they're not just voting, they are organizing. That's number one. And they are very organized, and they are very, very, very well funded. Your local school board, your local, high school, your PTA, all of these things that you take for granted that you haven't been involved in for one reason or another have pretty much been taken over. And so now, your local library can't have certain kinds of books because somebody is pressing on the outside. There needs to be proactive responses to all of these encroachments, because if they're not proactive pushback, then what's going to happen is that you're going to have books that you can't even read anymore. Toni Morrison, other people who are not even talking about things that are controversial, but have been deemed pornographic or not suitable for children. The whole canard about all of this is that it's usually about we wanted parental rights and family values. Those are the two things that have been used to blow up a big wedge. And so if you start to get involved in your communities, if you start to see candidates like this, you need to start to educate yourself, first of all. If you see somebody read a David Barton book, tell them this is Drek and give them a real history book. There are different ways you can talk to this, but I'm going to say the number one thing to everybody, because I know there's people in this room right now who have family members who believe this stuff. Start talking to your family members. You are afraid to you don't want to make waves. You need to make some waves. And if they don't like it, that's too bad, but you need to show them a different way. You can show it to them in love. You can show them to them through giving them books and reading materials and different things to watch. But you have to start to confront this, because if you just say, oh, that's my uncle so-and-so, or my aunt so-and-so, or my grandparents, they listen to this all the time, but I still love them, but they say all these racist things. You are the closest person to them to be able to say to them, this is wrong. And if you don't do that, then you're missing the point of what it means to express yourself in this country. You're not doing your part to make your future better.
Thank you so much. Appreciate the response as well in terms of enlarging the concept of civic engagement. So simply, even beyond simply the vote, but how do we go back to our own communities, own families, own enclaves, and begin to wrestle with these conversations in important ways. Because it seems, I think the point you're making is without a response, the void will tend to be this kind of Christian
Yes.
nationalism, as it were. I see in the chat someone asked a clarifying question. Another student asked, can you tell us a bit about David Barton?
Oh, yeah. David Barton is a Christian leader who has been writing books for years about, basically American history through the lens of Christianity. And if I had time, I would pull it up. I did a whole talk in my American Jesus class this semester about him. One of the things that he does, I would say very well, is to really take people down this path about what he thinks this Christian history of the nation is. So he's kind of tried to repurpose Jefferson and others. To him, Jefferson is a terrible person. A few years back, he was proven to have hugely, massively plagiarized and distorted a history book that he had written. This is back in 2012 or 2013. That book was completely pulled off of the shelves, but he is still a big part of this. So you can go, and I'm going to just pull it up really quickly and see if I can get to it. His site is called Wall Builders, and he has a whole structure of how he wants people to see the nation. And I'm going to show this to you real quick so that you understand what we're kind of dealing with here. If I can get to it. There we go. Can you see that? Helping Americans remember and preserve the true history of our great nation. So all of these books that he has, they have church resources. They go into churches and do all this stuff. It is a whole thing that is basically like, if you're an educator, church leader, legislator, anyone who just wants to discover more, this is how these ideas come out. Who is he great friends with right now? The Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson. So you need to understand that your Speaker of the House, the government of the United States, is a good friend to this guy and espouses these same ideas that he is putting out. So if you need to be afraid, if you need to think about what this means, then this is part of what this is about. It's how your governmental leaders are buying into the same stuff.
And I see a theme there too. I think in the title of the website, this wall builders or building walls, and it's interesting because we think about MLK building bridges and more inclusive rhetoric, and it's sort of the idea where you're living isolated with other Christians in a religiously diverse country, but that seems to be a theme. I appreciate again that as well for answering on this the question that was asked. Then it seems to me, okay, there was another question here that asks about can you talk about the way homophobia and transphobia factor into Christian nationalist discourse?
It's always been there. And it is not just Christian nationalist discourse. This has been, conservative Christian and conservative evangelical and Catholic discourse for a long time. The trans discourse has just come out really within the last 2 to 2.5 years because it's been seen as an effective tool to push back. It falls into the gender issues of, oh, we don't want people who really used to be men that now are women to be involved in sports and all of this. And so they've just deemed this a hazard. So it's been one way to try to get laws cut down in the state so that if somebody's transitioning, they have, taken away doctors' rights to give out hormones, things like that in certain states in the country. Okay. So this discourse about homophobia is actually a long-standing discourse. This was about this going back to gay marriage, going back to, homosexual rights in the 70s and early 80s. Okay. So this is, again, long-standing discourse. It's not something that just came up overnight. This has already been there. So if we think about all these different things in terms of how, Master Bake Shop and the whole cake thing and the court case about that, there's lots of ways in which this has been deployed at various times. And this is, again, not just like a now thing. This is another 50-year arc.
Thank you for that, explaining the connections between homophobia and transphobia in this white Christian nationalism. Another question had to do with, and I had a slightly different question, but the question here is, how do you think Christian nationalism, or I would say white Christian nationalism, will play out in 2024 election and beyond? That's one question. And maybe you want to respond to that. Maybe we're seeing it right now. Everything you're talking about
it's here right now. There's no playing out. The play is here. I mean, I don't understand how much stronger can I say this to you all? Okay. I don't mean to be flip here. Hello, you are living this right now. Your freedoms will be curtailed. All my job is from now until the election cycle is to show you what is going on. You can't keep up with it, but I can. So let me give you one way this is going to play out. This is very important. We don't even have time to talk about this. Project 2025 has been put together by the Heritage Foundation. It is a 900+ page primer for how to change the government and to get rid of most of the governmental agencies and put people in there that are A, loyalists to Donald Trump should he win, and B, to change the whole structure of things. It's going to change the way that we look at, aid to other countries. It's going to change the way in which certain kinds of offices there. It will demolish anything that's diversity, equity, and inclusion. It will demolish, things about immigration. Donald Trump has a project already that is a whole other thing called, 47, which is basically about how he's going to be interning people, who are immigrants so that they don't come into the country. This apparatus is huge and it's also moving. And so my job is to do two things, is to help you understand what this is, first of all, and secondarily to tell you that this has been with us for a very long time, but people have just been on this kind of space where it's not really going to happen. Those people are, over there, and you're a political scientist, you know this. I mean, how many times did people say the religious right was going to die? Well, it's not dead. It's actually on steroids right now and beating the crap out of everybody.
Dr. Butler, I think that particularly the last point you made, in the awakening that I think we all need to have in this discourse, in this conversation. And I think the larger point I hear you making is that we all have skin in the game. This affects everyone. And we can't just be in the backseat. We need to be engaged in this conversation going forward. I think we have about 5 minutes left, but I wanted to leave enough time for Dr. Birch to transition for those who are in the classroom and those who are virtual. But I do want to give you an opportunity. Is there any last thing you want to say, Dr. Butler?
Don't sit on the sidelines. You need to pay attention to this. The things I've mentioned today are just very brief kinds of ways in which you can look at this. There's so much more that is going on. There are plenty of great books to read about Christian nationalism. You can look for people like Andrew Whitehead, Philip Gorski, Sam, I'm just forgetting Sam's last name. He's at Oklahoma, who's really great in terms of thinking about things. You can look at PRRI International, where they've been polling about all of this, and I didn't show any of those polls today, but it's really important to see what the polling has been like for PRRI and Pew on certain things about Christian nationalism. Some of you have already read my book. It doesn't explicitly deal with Christian nationalism, but if you want to know the backstory about this, my book is very helpful for that. There are lots of really good books right now that are on Christian nationalism, but don't mistake these kinds of conversations for just things that you can forget about, because they will affect your life and they will affect you in ways that you cannot even begin to believe. And the last thing I want to say is this. This is not me criticizing Christians and saying that all Christians are bad for the beliefs that they have. That is not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that we have a nation of rule of law. We have the Constitution. We have the Declaration of Independence. This is not what the founders and framers wanted. I live in Philadelphia. I can walk to Independence Mall. I promise you that these men, who were mostly deists, only one Catholic among them, among the signers of the Declaration, did not want the kind of country that these people are trying to create it and make it to be right now. So if we're going to be true to them, who didn't even want somebody like me to be involved, then I ask you to really take seriously about what this election cycle means and about what democracy means to you and how we need to try to keep it.